Marcus Aurelius was born on a cold day in April of the year 1251. His mother, Domitia Lucilla, came from a rich family that owned many farms and businesses. His father, Marcus Annius Verus, was a respected senator who served the empire in many roles. From the start, the young boy lived in a world of marble houses and formal dinners. Yet his home was also a place where teachers talked about duty, honor, and how to keep a calm mind. When Marcus was a child, his father died when he was only 3 years old. His mother took over his care and made sure he learned the ways of the Roman elite. She hired private tutors to teach him reading, writing, and the basics of law. The lessons were not just about fact. The teachers also asked him to think about what it means to be a good person. In those early years, Marcus learned to read the works of earlier writers, especially the poets who praised courage and self-control. The school that Marcus attended was the famous school of the city of Rome. It was a place where boys learned Latin grammar, Greek language, and the art of public speaking. The teachers expected the boys to memorize long passages and recite them in front of the class. The pressure was high. A teenager today might feel the same stress when trying to get good grades or fit in with friends. Marcus felt that pressure too. He would stay up late, worrying about whether his speeches were clear enough. He learned to breathe slowly and remind himself that a single test does not define a whole life. This habit of calming the mind would later become a core part of his own writings. At the same time, a young athlete in a modern gym might train for a race. The athlete knows that each practice is a chance to improve, but also a chance to fail. The athlete learns to keep a steady routine, to push through pain, and to stay focused on the goal. Marcus practiced a similar discipline in his studies. He would rise early, walk to the garden, and read a short passage before breakfast. He treated each morning as a small training session for the mind, just as an athlete treats each run as a training session for the body. Around the age of 12, Marcus met a man named Fronto, a famous teacher of rhetoric. Fronto taught him how to argue, how to choose words that move a crowd, and how to listen carefully to what others say. Fronto also told Marcus that a leader must listen more than he speaks. This lesson would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. He learned that a ruler who hears his people can make better decisions. The next big change in Marcus' life came when he was 17. The emperor at the time, Hadrian, chose a man named Antoninus Pius to be his successor. As part of the plan, Antoninus was asked to adopt 2 young men, Marcus and his cousin, Lucius Verus. Adoption in Roman law was a way to choose an heir, even if the person was not a blood relative. Antoninus accepted the request, and Marcus became his son in the eyes of the law. This adoption was a turning point. It meant that Marcus would one day wear the purple robe of the emperor. The adoption story is a favorite anecdote among historians. It shows how the Roman system could shape a future ruler's path. When the adoption was announced, the streets of Rome buzzed with talk. Some people whispered that Marcus was too young, that he would need many teachers to prepare him. Others praised Antoninus for seeing potential in a boy who loved learning. The adoption also gave Marcus a new name, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. He now carried both his family name and the name of his new father. After the adoption, Marcus entered the household of Antoninus Pius. He lived in the imperial palace, where he could watch the daily work of the emperor. He saw how Antoninus handled petitions, how he met with generals, and how he kept a calm presence even in crisis. Marcus watched the emperor pause before answering, taking a breath, and then speaking clearly. He learned that a ruler must keep his thoughts steady, even when the world around him is noisy. During this time, Marcus also met 2 important teachers of philosophy. The first was Musonius Rufus, a Stoic philosopher who taught that virtue is the highest good. Musonius explained that a good life is not about wealth or fame, but about acting with wisdom and kindness. He used simple examples, like how a farmer must tend his field each day, even when the weather is bad. Marcus listened closely and took notes. He wrote that Musonius taught him to treat every task, no matter how small, as an opportunity to practice virtue. The second teacher was Epictetus, a former slave who became a famous philosopher. Epictetus never wrote books himself, but his student Arrian recorded his sayings. Epictetus taught that people cannot control what happens outside of them, but they can control how they think about those events. He said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters." Marcus found this idea powerful. He kept a small copy of Epictetus' sayings in his pocket and would read them when he felt angry or scared. These teachings shaped the way Marcus thought about the world. He began to see that the external events of life, war, politics, and even personal loss, were not the true source of suffering. Instead, the source was a restless mind that clung to desire and fear. This view would later appear in his famous book, The Meditations, a collection of personal notes he wrote while traveling with his army. When Marcus turned 20, he married a woman named Faustina, the daughter of Antoninus Pius. The marriage was both a personal and political alliance. Together they had many children, though many of them died young. The loss of his children hit Marcus hard. He wrote in his notes, "When a child dies, the pain is like a storm that passes but leaves a chill in the heart." Yet he tried to keep his thoughts steady, remembering the Stoic lesson that grief is a natural feeling, but it should not control his actions. At the age of 30, Marcus was named Caesar, the title given to the heir apparent. He began to take part in official duties. He traveled with Antoninus to the provinces, seeing how the empire ran far from Rome. He saw farmers struggling with taxes, soldiers dealing with harsh winters, and merchants trying to keep trade alive. These trips gave him a real sense of the challenges ordinary people faced. He remembered the story of a farmer who refused to blame the rain for a bad harvest and instead worked harder the next season. This story reminded him that effort and attitude matter more than circumstance. In the year 61, Antoninus Pius died. Marcus, now in his 40s, became the emperor of Rome. The transition was smooth because Antoninus had prepared him for the role. The Senate welcomed him, and the people cheered. Yet the new emperor knew that his job would not be easy. Soon after his accession, the empire faced threats on its northern borders. Germanic tribes began to cross the Danube River, seeking land and riches. Marcus had to lead his armies to defend the empire. One of the most vivid historical anecdotes from this period is the story of the Marcomannic Wars. In 1666, a large group of Germanic warriors attacked the Roman province of Pannonia. Marcus, despite being a philosopher, did not stay behind in the palace. He put on his armor, rode to the front, and spent many months in the field. While camped near the river, he wrote in his journal, "The mind must stay calm even when the sword is drawn." He used the same calm he had practiced in his youth to keep his soldiers focused. The wars lasted several years, but Marcus's steady leadership helped Rome push back the invaders. Another anecdote tells of a winter campaign in the Balkans. The army was cold, hungry, and low on morale. Marcus walked among his troops, sharing a thin broth and listening to their concerns. He told them, "A ruler is not above the hardships of his men. If I can bear this cold, so can you." His words lifted the spirits of the soldiers. They fought harder and eventually secured a peace treaty with the tribes. This episode shows how his philosophical training blended with his role as a military leader. While Marcus was fighting, he kept writing his notes. He wrote them on parchment, on wooden tablets, and even on the backs of letters. He called them meditations because they were private reflections, not meant for publication. In them he reminded himself to stay humble, to treat every person with respect, and to focus on what he could control. One famous line reads, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." This means that the mind takes on the hue of the ideas it holds. If the thoughts are kind, the soul is bright. If they are angry, the soul darkens. Some modern readers argue that Marcus' ideas are not useful because he was born into wealth and power. They say that a teenager who worries about a test cannot learn much from a man who never needed a job. This criticism points out that privilege can blind a person to everyday struggles. Yet the counter to this claim is that Marcus himself wrote about feeling pressure, about losing children, and about the fear of death. He faced real loss and real danger on the battlefield. His thoughts show that even a powerful man can feel anxiety and must learn to calm the mind. The fact that he wrote his notes in secret, not to impress anyone, shows that he was not writing to show off his status. Another criticism says that Marcus' actions sometimes contradicted his philosophy. For example, he ordered harsh punishments for rebels, and he approved of wars that caused many deaths. Critics say this does not match the Stoic ideal of peace and kindness. In response, scholars note that Stoic philosophy does not forbid defending one's community. It teaches that a ruler must protect his people, even if that means using force. Marcus believed that the safety of the empire was part of his duty, and that protecting citizens from invading tribes was a moral act. He also tried to be merciful when possible, granting clemency to those who surrendered. His actions, while harsh at times, were guided by a sense of responsibility rather than personal gain. The story of his adoption, his education, and his rise to power can be compared to a modern student who receives a scholarship to a top university. The student gets resources, mentors, and opportunities that many do not have. Yet the student still faces exams, deadlines, and the pressure to succeed. The student must learn to manage stress, to stay focused, and to keep a clear mind. In the same way, Marcus received the best teachers, the best books, and the chance to lead an empire, but he still felt the weight of expectations and the fear of failure. A second analogy can be drawn with a young musician learning a difficult piece. The musician practices each note slowly, listens for mistakes, and corrects them. The process requires patience and the willingness to accept that progress is gradual. Marcus practiced his philosophy in the same way. He read a short passage each morning, reflected on it, and wrote a brief note about what it meant for his day. Over years, these small practices built a strong inner habit, just as daily scales build a musician's skill. Throughout his life, Marcus kept a close relationship with his teachers. Musonius Rufus once told him, "Do not think that virtue is something far away. It lives in the simple acts of daily life." Marcus remembered this when he ordered the soldiers to share food with the local villagers. He also recalled Epictetus's advice. "Remember that you are an actor in a play, and your role is given to you." When the emperor faced a rebellion, he thought of his role as a caretaker, not as a tyrant. The early years of Marcus Aurelius wrote his thoughts in a small book called The Meditations. He was an emperor, but he wrote as a private man. He wanted to live a good life. He turned to the ideas of Stoicism to help him. Stoicism is a school of thought that began in ancient Greece. It teaches that a good life is built on virtue, on knowing what is in one's control, and on accepting what is not. The first idea is virtue. In Stoic language, virtue means the best part of a human being. It is the ability to act with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. Wisdom means seeing things as they are. Courage means facing fear without running away. Justice means treating others fairly. Self-control means not being ruled by impulses. When a person lives by these four parts, the Stoics say that person lives well. The second idea is control. Stoics split the world into two parts. One part can be controlled. The other part cannot. The part that can be controlled includes one's own thoughts, judgments, desires, and actions. The part that cannot be controlled includes other people, the weather, the traffic, the economy, the past, and the future. This split is called the dichotomy of control. It is a simple way to see where effort belongs. A quote from Epictetus, a former slave who taught Stoic ideas, makes this clear. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. In other words, the event of a traffic jam does not hurt a person. The judgment that the jam is a disaster does. If a person sees the jam as a chance to listen to a favorite song, the jam becomes harmless. A second quote from Marcus Aurelius reads, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." This line repeats the same point. The mind decides what is good or bad. The world simply is. To see how this works, imagine a traffic jam on a busy highway. The jam is outside of one's control. The driver cannot make the cars move faster. The driver can, however, control the reaction. One can sigh, curse, and feel angry. Or one can breathe, notice the moment, and use the time to think about a problem or listen to a podcast. The jam stays the same. The feeling changes. The Stoic answer is to focus on the feeling that can be changed. The driver chooses calm over anger. The driver also accepts that the jam will end when it ends. The driver does not waste energy fighting the jam. A second everyday example is a missed deadline at work. The missed deadline is partly in one's control because the person could have planned better, but also partly outside of control because other people may have delayed feedback. The Stoic response is to look at the part that can be changed. The person can send an apology, explain the cause, and plan a new timeline. The person can also accept the part that cannot be changed, such as the fact that the original deadline is now gone. The person does not stay stuck in shame. Instead, the person uses the lesson to improve future planning. These two stories show the practical side of the dichotomy of control. They also show how virtue guides the response. Wisdom tells the driver that the jam is not a moral failure. Courage lets the driver stay calm in a stressful moment. Justice reminds the driver to be kind to other drivers. Self-control helps the driver avoid a road outburst. The roots of Stoicism go back to a man named Zeno of Citium. Zeno was a merchant from Cyprus who lost his ship in a storm. He walked to a porch in Athens and began to teach. He taught that living according to nature, meaning living in harmony with reason, leads to peace. He founded a school called the Stoic, the painted porch, where students gathered. One anecdote says that Zeno once gave a lecture while a dog barked loudly. He said the dog's bark was not a problem for the mind, only for the ears. He used the moment to illustrate that external noise does not disturb a calm mind. Another early Stoic, Seneca, wrote letters to his brother, Lucilius. In those letters he gave advice on how to live well. One letter says, "Begin at once to live, and count each day as a separate life." Seneca also wrote that a person should not be a slave to fear. He urged his brother to practice daily reflection, to ask what was in his power and what was not. These letters are still read today because they show how Stoic ideas can be used in everyday life. Epictetus, who taught after Zeno, was a former slave. He once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." He taught that the only true freedom comes from mastering one's own thoughts. He also taught that a person should act as if the whole world were a stage, and each person had a role to play. This view supports the idea that external events are not the source of happiness or misery. Critics have raised two main objections to Stoicism. The first objection says that Stoicism suppresses emotions. Critics claim that by telling people to view events as neutral, Stoicism asks them to hide feelings like grief, love, or anger. They argue that feeling emotions is part of being human, and that trying to push them away can lead to numbness. In response, Stoic teachers say that the goal is not to hide emotions, but to understand them. They say that a person can feel grief, but can also see that grief is a judgment about loss, not the loss itself. The Stoic practice of examining thoughts helps a person see the source of the feeling, and then choose how to act. The aim is to prevent emotions from taking over reason, not to erase them. The second objection says that Stoicism promotes passive acceptance. Critics argue that if a person accepts everything that cannot be controlled, they may stop trying to change unjust situations. They worry that this could lead to social stagnation, because people might accept oppression or inequality. Stoics answer that acceptance of what cannot be changed does not mean inaction. They point to the virtue of courage, which calls for active effort to improve the world. A Stoic can see that a corrupt law is outside of personal control, but can still work to change it through just actions. The key is to focus effort on what can be changed, while staying calm about what cannot. Modern interpretations of Stoicism keep these ideas alive. Today, many people use the term dichotomy of control in self-help books and apps. Some therapists use Stoic exercises to help clients manage anxiety. In the later part of this series, the channel will show how to turn these ideas into a daily practice. It will give a simple routine. Start the day by naming what is in control, end the day by reviewing what was done well, and keep a journal of judgments that caused upset. This practice follows the ancient habit of morning and evening reflections that Marcus Aurelius kept. A modern example of Stoic practice appears in the life of a software developer named Maya. She faced a sudden server outage that caused a loss of user data. The outage was caused by a third-party service, which she could not control. Maya first felt panic, but then remembered the Stoic split. She focused on the part she could control, informing users, coordinating with the provider, and fixing the code. She did not waste energy blaming the provider. She wrote a short note to her team. The outage is outside our control, but our response is in our hands. By doing so, she kept the team calm and solved the problem faster. A second modern example involves a college student named Luis, who missed an important scholarship deadline because his internet went down. The outage was beyond his control. Luis could have stayed upset and given up. Instead, he used the Stoic idea of virtue. He wrote a polite email to the scholarship committee, explained the situation, and asked for a possible extension. He also set up a backup plan for future deadlines. The committee granted a brief extension, and Luis learned to prepare for technical failures. This story shows how the Stoic approach can turn a setback into an opportunity. Historical anecdotes also illustrate the power of Stoic thinking. One story tells of the Roman general Aulus Gellius, who faced a sudden ambush in battle. He remembered Epictetus teaching that the obstacle in the path becomes the path. He did not panic. He ordered his troops to form a defensive line, using the terrain that the enemy thought would be an advantage. The ambush turned into a victory. Another anecdote involves the philosopher Musonius Rufus, who taught his students to practice poverty voluntarily. He said that by living with less, a person learns to separate need from desire. His students later reported that they could stay calm even when the empire faced famine. Stoic ideas also appear in the writings of Seneca's friend, the poet Lucan. Lucan once wrote that wise man is like a rock that the waves cannot move. This image matches the Stoic view that external events are like waves, while the mind is the rock that stays steady. The image is simple and easy to picture, helping a listener remember the core point. To bring the ideas together, the script can list 3 simple steps that follow the Stoic model. First, identify the event. Second, ask, "Is this in my control?" Third, respond with the virtue that fits best. For a traffic jam, the answer is self-control and patience. For a missed deadline, the answer is wisdom to plan better and courage to ask for help. By practicing these steps each day, a person builds a habit that aligns with the ancient Stoic tradition. The language used by the ancient Stoics can be tough at first, but the core message is plain. It says that a good life does not depend on luck or on what other people do. It depends on how one thinks and acts. It says that the mind can be trained like a muscle. It says that calm is possible even in a storm, if the mind sees the storm as something outside of its power. A final quote from Marcus Aurelius ties the whole section together. "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." This line reminds the listener that thoughts are the starting point. By shaping thoughts, a person shapes life. In the next section, the channel will move from theory to practice. It will show how to write a short morning note, how to pause before reacting, and how to keep a control list. These tools turn the ancient ideas of Zeno, Seneca, and Epictetus into habits that fit modern life. By keeping the focus on virtue, on what can be changed, and on calm acceptance of what cannot, the viewer can walk the road that Marcus Aurelius once walked, one step at a time. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius lived in a time when war and politics were part of daily life. Yet behind the armor and the throne he kept a small notebook. He wrote in it when the sun set on a cold night by the Danube, when the sound of marching boots faded, and when a battle had left his mind heavy. The pages were not meant for a crowd, they were meant for his own eyes. In that way, the meditations are like a diary that a modern person might open after a hard day at work. A person may sit at a kitchen table, stare at a cup of tea, and write down thoughts about anger, loss, or a mistake. The act of writing helps the mind settle, and the notes become a mirror that shows what is inside. Marcus used the same method. He did not plan to publish a book, he simply wanted to keep his thoughts straight. Think of a sports coach after a game. The coach watches the play, notes what went well, and writes down what needs fixing. The notes are private, meant for the next practice. The coach does not expect fans to read them, but the coach knows that the written words will guide future actions. Marcus acted as his own coach. He observed his own reactions, wrote down what he saw, and used the words to improve his character. The notebook was a tool for self-discipline, not a public lecture. The first clear picture of Marcus' writing comes from a story told by the historian Cassius Dio. Dio says that while the Roman legions were camped along the Danube River, the emperor would sit on a low stool, a small wax tablet in his hand, and record thoughts about duty, death, and the nature of the world. The river was cold, the soldiers were tired, and the empire faced threats from the Germanic tribes. Yet the emperor found a quiet moment to ask himself, "What is within my control?" He wrote, "If you are distressed by any external thing, it is not the thing itself that troubles you, but your judgment about it." This line, taken from the Meditations, shows how the notebook served as a reminder to keep calm in chaos. A second anecdote comes from the Renaissance. In the early 1500s, a monk named Francesco de Monti was cataloguing a collection of ancient scrolls in a monastery library in Italy. Among the dusty bundles, he found a thin codex written in Greek. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the words were clear enough to read. De Monti realized that the manuscript was a personal notebook of a Roman emperor. He sent the codex to a scholar named Francesco Bianchini, who recognized its value and had it copied. The copied version spread across Europe and eventually reached the hands of scholars who began to translate it into Latin and then into modern languages. This discovery turned a private set of notes into a work that would be read by millions. The fact that the Meditations survived at all shows how a personal journal can travel far beyond its original purpose. The purpose of the notebook can be summed up in a simple way. It was a tool for self-examination. Marcus often wrote about the idea that a person should look at their own mind as a farmer looks at a field. He said that a farmer removes weeds, waters the soil, and watches the crops grow. In the same way, a person should pull out harmful thoughts, feed good habits, and watch the soul become stronger. This analogy is easy to picture, and it matches the way many people use a diary today. The act of writing helps to catch the weeds before they take root. One of the most famous lines from the Meditations reads, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This quote is often shared on social media, but it was originally a private reminder to the emperor. He wrote it to keep himself steady when the empire's borders were under attack. The line shows that the notebook was a place to store practical advice for daily life, not a set of lofty theories for scholars. The notebook also contains many short reflections that read like notes a teacher might leave on a student's paper. For example, Marcus writes, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy." This sentence is a gentle nudge to start the day with gratitude. It is the kind of note a parent might leave on a child's pillow to remind them of the good things they have. The tone is calm, direct, and personal. Even though the Meditations were private, later readers have asked whether Marcus might have intended the words to be shared after his death. Some scholars argue that the emperor knew his thoughts could help future leaders, and that he left the notebook in a place where it could be found. They point to the fact that the notebook was kept in the imperial library after Marcus died, and that the emperor's son, Commodus, allowed scholars to copy it. This view suggests that the purpose was partly to leave a legacy. A second counterargument says that the Meditations were never meant to be read by anyone else, and that the fragmented style shows this. The notebook is made up of short, sometimes unfinished sentences, like a list of reminders. There is no clear introduction, no organized chapters, and many thoughts seem to jump from one idea to another. This lack of structure would make a public treatise difficult to follow. The style matches the way a person writes quick notes to themselves, not a polished book for an audience. Both of these counter-arguments have merit. The first points out that the notebook survived and was copied, which could mean that Marcus expected it to be useful to others. The second notes that the form of the writing is too raw for a formal work. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Marcus wrote for himself, but he also knew that his thoughts might help anyone who read them. The modern translator George Long played a key role in shaping how the Meditations are read today. In the 19th century, Long produced an English version that kept the short, direct style of the original Greek. He added notes that explain words like logos, which means reason or the order of the universe. By keeping the language simple, Long made the notebook feel like a conversation rather than a lecture. His translation is still used in many classrooms because it feels close to the way Marcus wrote. Today, people use the Meditations in many ways that echo the original purpose. A student might write a short entry after a stressful exam, noting, "Well, I felt panic, but I can control my reaction." A therapist might suggest a client keep a journal of thoughts about fear, using Marcus's idea that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. In each case, the notebook serves as a personal guide, not a public manifesto. Another modern example comes from a tech startup. The founder of a small company keeps a daily log of decisions, successes, and failures. He writes, "Today I felt frustrated when a partner disagreed. I can choose to stay calm and listen. This mirrors Marcus' habit of noting his own emotional responses and reminding himself to stay rational. The founder does not intend the log to be read by investors. It is a private tool for growth. The idea that a personal notebook can become a worldwide source of wisdom is not unique to Marcus. Many famous people kept private journals that later inspired others. The French writer Voltaire kept a notebook of short sayings that were published after his death. The difference with Marcus is that his notes were already written in a reflective, philosophical style, making them easy to turn into a guide for life. A common analogy that helps explain the purpose of the meditations is the way a traveler uses a map. A traveler draws a simple sketch of the road, marks the places where the path is steep, and notes where water can be found. The sketch is not a detailed atlas, but it helps the traveler stay on track. Marcus' notebook works the same way. It marks the mental terrain, points out steep thoughts, and reminds the writer where calm can be found. The meditations also contain a number of short, vivid images that act like mental pictures. Marcus writes, "The whole universe is change, and our life is what our thoughts make it." This line paints a picture of life as a river that constantly flows, and the mind as a boat that can steer. The image stays with the reader and makes the idea easy to remember, just as a traveler might remember a landmark on a road. When the manuscript was found in the 16th century, scholars were surprised to learn that a Roman emperor had written such intimate thoughts. The manuscript was written on papyrus, and the ink had faded in places. Yet the words survived because the emperor had taken care to write clearly and to store the notebook in a dry place. The discovery sparked a wave of interest in Stoic philosophy, and the meditations quickly became a staple of Renaissance humanist study. The spread of the meditations in the modern era was helped by the printing press. In the 1600s, a printer in London produced a Latin edition, and soon after an English translation appeared. Readers in England and France began to quote the short lines in letters and essays. The fact that the text could be quoted easily is due to its original form as a collection of brief notes. Each line can stand alone, making it useful for people who want a quick reminder. One of the most quoted passages reads, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." This sentence is short enough to fit on a postcard, yet it carries a deep idea that a person's inner life shapes their outer experience. The brevity of the line reflects the notebook style, a quick note to oneself, not a long argument. Critics who see the meditations as a public work point out that the emperor was aware of his reputation. They argue that by writing down his thoughts, Marcus was creating a record that would influence how future rulers behaved. They cite a passage where Marcus says, "If you are troubled by a man's criticism, remember that you are the one who decides how to react." This could be read as advice for anyone in power, not just for the writer. On the other hand, some modern readers find the fragmented style hard to follow. They note that the notes jump from one topic to another without clear transitions. A reader might see a line about death, then a line about the behavior of a horse, then a line about the importance of honesty. This can feel confusing, especially for someone expecting a systematic philosophy. The lack of order is a sign that the notebook was not meant to be a textbook, but a personal guide. George Long's translation tries to keep the original feel while adding brief explanations. For instance, when Marcus writes about the rational soul, Long adds a note that this means the part of us that can think clearly and make choices. These notes help a modern reader who may not know ancient Greek concepts. Long's work shows respect for the original purpose, to keep the words simple enough for the writer himself to understand, while still being clear for later readers. The meditations have been used in many different fields. In the military, officers sometimes read short passages to remind themselves of duty and calm under fire. In schools, teachers use the quotes to start discussions about how to handle stress. In therapy, Counselors suggest clients write their own short reflections, following Marcus's example of checking thoughts each day. A recent study by a psychology department found that people who keep a daily gratitude journal report lower stress levels. The study mentions Marcus Aurelius as an early example of this practice. The researchers note that his line about waking up and thinking of the privilege of life is a classic gratitude note. The voice of the video begins by saying that the 12 books of Marcus Aurelius' meditations read like a set of short notes that the emperor wrote to himself. Each book feels like a small chapter in a long story, and each chapter carries its own mood and focus. The voice compares the way the books are arranged to the way a favorite TV series is split into seasons. Just as a season may start with a new setting and end with a lesson, each book of the meditations opens with a fresh set of thoughts and closes with a quiet reminder. The voice also likens the books to sections of a recipe book. One section tells how to mix patience, another shows how to add a pinch of humility, and the final page always reminds the cook to taste the dish before serving. Book 1 opens with gratitude. Marcus thanks his family, his teachers, and even the people who challenged him. The tone is warm and personal. He writes, "From my mother, I learned good morals and kindness." This simple line shows that the emperor saw his early life as a source of strength. The voice notes that the gratitude theme runs through the whole work, but it is most vivid here. Book 2 shifts to the idea of living in the present. Marcus tells himself to stop thinking about the past or the future. Focus on what you are doing now. The voice explains that this is a core idea of Stoic thought, to act according to reason in the moment. The book feels like a reminder to put down the phone and pay attention to the task at hand. Book 3 brings the concept of nature. Marcus writes that everything is part of a larger order, like a river that flows to the sea. He says, "All things are woven together, and the whole world works as a single organism." The voice points out that this view helps the reader feel less alone when trouble comes. Book 4 deals with the idea of self-control. Marcus repeats the phrase, "Do not be angry," and adds, "But remember that the mind is like a fortress. Guard it well." The voice says this book is like a training drill for the mind, teaching the reader to keep calm when provoked. Book 5 is about duty. Marcus reminds himself that a ruler must rise early and work for the common good. He writes, "When you wake, remember that you have a role to play in the world." The voice notes that this is a practical call to action, not just a lofty idea. Book 6 returns to the idea of change. Marcus says that everything that exists will fade, and that we should accept that fact without fear. He writes, "All things that exist are temporary, and that is why they are beautiful." The voice compares this to watching a sunset. The beauty lies in the fact that it ends. Book 7 focuses on the power of thoughts. Marcus tells himself that the mind can turn a stone into a mountain or a mountain into a stone. The voice explains that this means thoughts shape how we see the world, and that a calm mind can make a hard day feel easier. Book 8 adds a note on compassion. Marcus says, "When you see a friend in trouble, help them as if they were yourself." The voice points out that this is a reminder that kindness is not a sacrifice, but a natural response. Book 9 looks at death. Marcus writes, "When death comes, it is just a return to the natural order." The voice says this is not a morbid thought, but a way to calm fear, much like a child learning that bedtime is part of the day. Book 10 returns to the idea of inner peace. Marcus repeats, "Will keep your mind steady like a rock in a river." The voice notes that the repetition here works like a mantra, a short phrase that steadies the heart. Book 11 brings the notion of justice. Marcus says, "Treat others as you would like to be treated, and do not let anger cloud your judgment." The voice says this is a simple rule that can guide many decisions. Book 12 ends with a final reminder to stay humble. Marcus writes, "Remember that you are just a small part of a larger whole, and that all things are temporary." The voice says that this closing line ties back to the first book's gratitude and the later book's focus on change. The voice then moves to an everyday analogy. Imagine watching a TV series with 12 episodes. The first episode introduces the main characters, the second shows the conflict, the third brings a new setting, and so on. By the final episode, the story feels complete, and the viewer can see how each part fits together. The meditations work in the same way. Each book adds a new angle on how to live well, and together they make a full picture of Marcus' own practice of philosophy. A second analogy comes from a recipe book. The first chapter may teach how to chop vegetables, the second how to simmer a broth, the third how to add spices. If a cook skips a chapter, the dish may taste flat. In the meditations, skipping a book can leave a reader missing a key habit, such as gratitude or self-control. The voice points out that the order of the books is not random, even if it feels loose at times. Historical anecdote 1 tells how the meditations survived after Marcus' death. The emperor never meant his notes to be published. They were private reflections kept on thin parchment. After his death in 1880 CE, a group of his friends gathered the scattered sheets and bound them into a single volume. The voice explains that this early compilation was done by a scribe named Maximus, who arranged the pages in the order we have today. Maximus likely chose the order based on the way the sheets were found, but also tried to keep related ideas close together. Historical anecdote 2 describes how early readers used the meditations. In the 4th century, a monk named Cassian found a copy in a monastery library. He read the short passages each night before sleep, using them as a guide for his own thoughts. Cassian wrote in his own notebook, "These words are a lamp in the dark night of the soul." The voice notes that this practice of reading a short passage each day is still common among modern readers of the meditations. The voice now presents 2 counterarguments that scholars sometimes raise. The first claim is that the 12 books lack a clear order. Some readers say the topics jump from gratitude to death without a smooth transition, making the whole work feel like a random list of notes. The voice acknowledges this view, noting that the lack of a strict sequence can be confusing for someone looking for a step-by-step guide. The second counterargument says that the repetition in the meditations is redundant. Critics point out that Marcus repeats ideas about self-control, nature, and mortality many times, which could be seen as filler. The voice responds that the repetition serves a purpose. It works like a teacher who repeats a lesson until it sticks. The repeated lines act as reminders, not as wasted words. Scholars such as A. Long have written about these points. Long argues that the seeming disorder is actually a reflection of how the mind works. Thoughts appear in bursts, not in a tidy outline. He also says that the repeated phrases are a feature of Stoic practice, because Stoics used short sayings as daily exercises. The voice mentions that later analysis of key passages, such as the line, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts," shows that scholars have traced how this idea appears in several books, each time with a slightly different twist. This shows that the repetition is intentional, not accidental. The voice then moves to real-world applications. One modern reader uses book 4's advice on anger to stay calm during traffic jams. By recalling the line, "Do not be angry, for anger harms the mind," the driver takes a deep breath and lets the frustration pass. Another reader applies Book 9's view on death to cope with the loss of a loved one. By reminding themselves that death is a natural part of the order, they find a calm acceptance rather than panic. In everyday life, the ideas from Book 6 about change help people adapt to new jobs. When a person feels uneasy about a promotion, The reminder that all things are temporary can ease the fear of the unknown. The voice notes that each book offers a small tool that can be used in daily situations. The voice also points out that modern philosophers still talk about the Meditations. A contemporary writer, Massimo Pigucci, writes that the Meditations act like a personal handbook for mental health. He says that reading a short passage each morning can set the tone for the whole day. This shows that the ancient notes still have a place in modern self-help practices. To illustrate the structure further, the voice gives two concrete examples. Example 1 follows a student named Lena who reads book 1 before a test. She focuses on the gratitude line, thinking of her teacher's help, and feels less anxious. Example 2 follows a nurse named Omar who reads book 10 during a night shift. The steady rock metaphor helps him stay calm while caring for many patients. Both examples show how each book can fit a specific need. The voice also returns to the TV series analogy. Imagine a viewer who skips the middle episodes of a drama. The story would feel incomplete, and the character's growth would be unclear. In the same way, skipping a book in the Meditations can leave a gap in the philosophical journey. The voice encourages the listener to treat each book as a needed episode. Finally, the voice reminds the audience that the Meditations were never meant to be a public work. They were private notes, like a diary. Yet the fact that they survived and are still read today shows that personal reflection can become a shared treasure. The voice ends by saying that the 12 books, with their simple language and steady advice, form a gentle guide that can be opened any day, just like a favorite recipe or a beloved TV episode, ready to offer a calm thought for the moment. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private notebook a line that reads, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The calm voice of the narrator explains that the sentence tells a simple truth. The mind can choose how to react, even when the world is noisy. Imagine a storm outside the window. The wind may howl, the rain may pound, but the mind can stay still like a quiet lake. In that calm, the person can think clearly and act wisely. The line reminds the listener that panic is a choice, not a forced fate. The second famous line is, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." This line says that what fills a day is not the events that happen, but the way the mind frames them. If a student receives a low grade, the thought, "Why failed?" can bring sorrow, while the thought, "I can learn from this," can bring hope. The narrator gives the example of a driver stuck in traffic. The driver may think this is terrible and feel angry, or may think this is a chance to listen to a favorite song and feel calm. The passage invites the listener to see that thought patterns shape daily feeling. A third line often quoted is, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." The narrator breaks this down by saying that each new day is a gift, not a given. A person who wakes up after a night shift may feel tired, but the line asks the mind to notice the simple fact of breathing. The narrator offers the image of a child opening a present. The child's excitement comes from the surprise, not from the price of the toy. In the same way, the mind can find joy in the fact of being alive. The fourth line chosen is, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your judgment about it." Here the narrator points out that the source of hurt is the label the mind puts on an event. A friend's harsh comment may sting, not because the words are powerful, but because the mind decides they are a personal attack. The narrator uses the picture of a glass that appears half empty. The glass is the same, but the mind can call it empty or full. The passage asks the listener to check the label before feeling upset. The fifth line highlighted is, "Well, the best revenge is to be unlike your enemy." The narrator explains that this line does not call for violence, but for a different attitude. If a bully tries to provoke anger, the best answer is to stay calm and kind. The narrator gives the example of a teammate who cheats in a game. Instead of yelling, the player can choose to play fairly and enjoy the game. By staying unlike the cheater, the player protects his own peace. Ryan Holiday, a modern writer who often cites Marcus Aurelius, says that these short sayings work like a toolbox for daily life. He writes that each line can be pulled out when a problem appears, and it will help shape a better response. The narrator notes that Holiday's books have brought these ancient ideas to athletes, CEOs, and students. He points out that Holiday often repeats the line about the mind's power, saying that it is the core of a calm life. A historical anecdote shows how a later leader used the line about the mind's power. During World War II, a British admiral quoted Marcus Aurelius to his crew before a night battle. He told them that the sea could not touch their thoughts, and that staying calm would guide the ship safely. The crew remembered the quote and reported that they felt less fear during the fight. The story illustrates how a military leader found the ancient line useful in a life or death moment. Another anecdote comes from the world of popular culture. In a famous 1990s film, a detective reads the line about happiness and thoughts while sitting in a rain-soaked alley. He tells a rookie that the case will not change his mood unless the rookie lets it. The film's audience later quoted the line on social media, turning it into a meme about staying positive during a bad day. The narrator explains that the line's simple wording made it easy to share and remember. The narrator now turns to two common criticisms of the passages. The first criticism says that the lines are overly simple. Critics argue that life's problems are often tangled, and a short quote cannot capture the depth of grief, loss, or injustice. They say that telling a grieving parent to choose a different thought may feel dismissive. The narrator acknowledges this view, noting that some people feel the advice ignores the heavy weight of real pain. A second criticism points out that the lines ignore historical context. Marcus Aurelius wrote while he was an emperor facing war, disease, and political intrigue. Some scholars say that removing the lines from that setting strips them of the urgency and the specific challenges he faced. They argue that the advice was meant for a ruler who could control many aspects of his world, not for a modern person who may feel powerless. The narrator mentions that some modern philosophers caution readers to study the whole notebook before applying a single sentence. Despite these critiques, many thinkers find value in the passages. The narrator cites a contemporary philosopher who writes that the lines act as a reminder, not a complete solution. He says that the quotes can spark deeper study and can be a first step toward a more thoughtful life. The narrator also mentions a therapist who uses the line about judgment in cognitive therapy, helping patients see that their distress often comes from the label they place on an event. Returning to the first line about the mind's power, the narrator gives another everyday example. A person waiting for a delayed train can feel trapped. By remembering that the mind can stay still, the person can choose to read a book or listen to music, turning the wait into a calm pause. The line becomes a small tool for turning irritation into a quiet moment. For the second line about thoughts shaping happiness, the narrator tells the story of a farmer who lost a crop to frost. The farmer could think, "My hard work is gone," or could think, "The frost taught me how to protect my fields next year." The farmer chose the latter, and his next season was more successful. The passage shows how a simple shift in thought can change the direction of a life. The third line about the privilege of being alive can be linked to a hospital patient who wakes after surgery. The patient may focus on pain, but the line invites the mind to notice the simple act of breathing. The narrator points out that many recovery programs ask patients to count breaths, echoing the ancient reminder to value each breath. The fourth line about judgment can be illustrated with a teenager who receives a harsh comment on social media. The teen can label the comment as bullying, which brings anger, or can see it as someone's bad day, which reduces the sting. The narrator notes that the label the mind chooses can change the emotional outcome. The fifth line about not becoming like the enemy can be seen in a workplace dispute. Two co-workers argue over credit for a project. One co-worker could respond with sarcasm, but instead chooses to stay professional and help the team. By not mirroring the aggression, the co-worker keeps the office atmosphere calm. The narrator says that this choice protects both personal peace and the group's work. Ryan Holiday often repeats the idea that lust revenge is to be unlike your enemy when he writes about athletes who lose a game due to a foul. He tells them to focus on their own training, not on the opponent's cheating. The narrator shares that a famous basketball player quoted the line in a post-game interview, saying that he would rather improve his own skill than dwell on the foul. The quote went viral, showing how the ancient line still speaks to modern competition. A later leader, a president of a South American country, quoted the line about happiness and thoughts during a televised address after a natural disaster. He urged citizens to think of hope and rebuilding rather than dwelling on loss. The speech was praised for its calm tone and for giving people a mental tool to cope with grief. The narrator notes that the line helped shape a national mood of resilience. In popular culture, the line, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive," appears in a popular video game's opening cutscene. The game's hero wakes in a ruined city and hears the voice of an old mentor reciting the line. Players reported that the line set a hopeful tone for the rest of the game, even as they faced dark challenges. The narrator points out that the line's simple wording fits well in many media forms. The narrator now returns to the criticism that the quotes are too short. Some scholars argue that reading a single line can give a false sense of mastery. They say that true wisdom requires long study, discussion, and practice. The narrator balances this by noting that a short line can spark curiosity, leading a listener to read more of the meditations. The line can be a door, not the whole house. The second criticism about context is also examined. Marcus Aurelius wrote while leading an empire, dealing with wars on the borders. Some argue that his advice to stay calm while storms rage was meant for a ruler who could order troops, not for a farmer who cannot control the weather. The narrator explains that modern readers can still find value by seeing the line as a reminder to focus on what can be changed, even if the scale differs. Philosophers such as Massimo Pigliucci have written that the meditations are a personal diary, not a formal treatise. He says that the lines work best when readers see them as personal reflections, not as universal laws. The narrator notes that this view helps avoid the trap of treating the quotes as rigid rules. Another modern commentator, Donald Robertson, points out that the line about the mind's power fits well with modern cognitive therapy. He explains that therapy often teaches patients to notice their thoughts and to change unhelpful ones. The narrator connects this to the ancient advice, showing a bridge between old philosophy and modern science. The narrator offers a final, everyday picture for each line. For the mind's power, a child learning to ride a bike can feel fear when falling. By remembering that the mind can stay calm, the child can try again without panic. For the quality of thoughts, a shopper who finds a sale can think, "I saved money," instead of "I spent too much." For the privilege of being alive, a person on a long hike can feel gratitude for the fresh air. For the judgment line, a driver who gets cut off can think, "The other driver is in a hurry," instead of "They are rude." For the revenge line, a sibling who is teased can choose to help with chores rather than argue, showing a different path. In closing, the narrator reminds the audience that Marcus Aurelius wrote these lines for himself, not for a crowd. Yet the simple words have traveled across centuries, finding a place in the minds of soldiers, leaders, athletes, and everyday people. By looking at each line, breaking it down, and seeing how it can fit into daily life, the listener can turn an old notebook into a set of tools for calm and kind living. The voice ends with a gentle invitation to try one line today, to notice the shift it can bring, and to keep exploring the rest of the meditations for more quiet strength. Marcus Aurelius wrote his thoughts in a small book called The Meditations. In that book, he taught that each day can start with a clear mind and end with a calm heart. The ideas in the meditations are not only for ancient Rome. They can be turned into simple habits that fit a modern life. This part of the video shows how to use 3 basic exercises. A short morning reflection, a practice called negative visualization, and a habit of writing a short journal entry. Each exercise is described in plain steps. Then 2 everyday scenes are shown, getting ready for a job interview and dealing with a family dispute. After that, 2 stories from Marcus' own life are told. Finally, 2 common doubts are answered, and a modern teacher named Massimo Pigliucci is mentioned. The whole guide ties back to the core ideas that were explained earlier in the series. The first habit is a morning reflection. In the quiet moments after waking, a person can take 3 breaths and ask 3 simple questions. First, what will I meet today that is outside my control? Second, how can I stay calm when that happens? Third, what good can I do for others? The questions are short, but they point the mind toward the main Stoic rule. Focus on what can be changed, let go of what cannot. The practice can last only 2 minutes. It does not need a special place. A person can sit on the edge of the bed, look out the window, and speak the answers out loud or think them silently. The goal is to set a tone of calm before the day begins. The second habit is negative visualization. This is a short mental walk through possible bad outcomes. It sounds odd, but the point is to see how one would handle loss or trouble. The exercise can be done after the morning reflection or at any quiet moment. The steps are simple. First, picture a small problem, like a missed bus. Then picture a bigger problem, like a bad result on a test. Finally, picture a serious loss, such as a health issue. After each picture, ask, if this happens, what will I still have? And how will I react? By seeing the worst cases, a person builds a mental buffer. The mind learns that even the worst is survivable. The exercise also makes everyday comforts feel less fragile. It is a way to keep pride from growing too high and fear from growing too low. The third habit is a short journal entry at the end of the day. The journal can be a notebook, a phone note, or a voice recording. The entry should answer 3 quick prompts. First, what did I do well today? Second, what could I have done better? Third, what will I try tomorrow? The purpose is not to judge harshly, but to see progress. The practice helps a person notice patterns. It also gives a chance to repeat the morning questions, but with real examples. The journal can be as short as 3 lines. The habit builds a loop of reflection, action, and review that matches the Stoic cycle of thought, deed, and judgment. Now the script moves to 2 everyday examples that show how the 3 habits can help in real life. The first example is a job interview. Imagine a person named Alex who has a big interview for a dream job. Alex feels nervous. In the morning, Alex sits on the bed and does the 3-question reflection. Alex notes that the interviewer's mood, the company's budget, and the final hiring decision are all outside personal control. Alex decides to focus on what can be controlled: arriving on time, speaking clearly, and listening well. Alex also adds a note to help the interviewers feel respected. After the reflection, Alex spends a minute on negative visualization. Alex pictures the interview not going well, perhaps a tough question or a silence. Alex imagines staying calm, breathing, and answering honestly. By seeing the worst case, Alex feels less scared of it. After the interview, Alex writes a short journal entry. Alex notes that the greeting was friendly, that a difficult question was answered with a clear example, and that a small mistake was made when answering a technical detail. Alex plans to review the mistake and to practice that topic for the next interview. The 3 habits turn a stressful event into a series of small, manageable steps. The second example is a family dispute. Imagine a person named Maya, who has a heated argument with a sibling about caring for an aging parent. The argument feels personal and heavy. In the morning, Maya does the reflection. Maya asks what parts of the argument are out of personal control. Maya sees that the siblings' feelings, the parents' health, and the past history cannot be changed in the moment. Maya decides to focus on listening, staying calm, and offering help where possible. Maya then tries negative visualization. Maya imagines the conversation becoming very angry, the sibling walking away, or the parent becoming upset. Maya imagines staying calm, speaking slowly, and reminding the sibling of shared love for the parent. This mental rehearsal gives Maya a sense of preparedness. After the conversation, Maya writes a journal entry. Maya notes that the sibling's voice rose, but Maya kept a steady tone. Maya also notes that Maya offered a concrete plan for sharing duties, which helped calm the situation. Maya plans to check in with the sibling later and to keep the tone gentle. The habits help Maya turn a painful moment into a chance for growth. Both examples show how the 3 simple exercises can be woven into daily life. The practices do not require hours of time. They only need a few minutes each. They also match the core ideas that were discussed earlier, that thoughts shape emotions, that we can train the mind, and that we can act with virtue even in small moments. Now the script turns to 2 stories from Marcus Aurelius himself. These stories show that the emperor used similar habits before big challenges. The first story comes from a time when Marcus was preparing for a battle on the Danube River. The Roman army faced a strong enemy tribe. The night before the fight, Marcus walked alone in his tent. He held a small leather notebook, the same kind of book that later became the Meditations. He wrote down a short note. Remember that the enemy is a fellow human, that fear is a judgment, and that the outcome is not in my power. He then spent a few minutes looking at the stars and picturing the worst that could happen. A loss, a wound, a retreat. He asked himself how he would act if those things occurred. He imagined staying calm, keeping his soldiers steady, and learning from the loss. This mental rehearsal gave him a steady heart when the battle began. The ancient historian Cassius Dio recorded that Marcus entered the field with a clear mind and that his troops felt his calm. The story shows that even an emperor used a simple morning reflection and a mental walk through bad outcomes before a high-stakes event. The second story is from a period when Marcus fell ill with a fever that lasted several weeks. The emperor could not lead the army or attend the Senate. He stayed in his private quarters, wrapped in blankets. In that quiet time, he turned to his notebook again. He wrote, "What is the purpose of this pain? How can I keep my mind free while my body suffers?" He also practiced a form of negative visualization. He imagined the fever getting worse, his body growing weaker, even death. He asked himself how he would meet those moments with dignity. He reminded himself that the body is a vessel, and that the mind can stay bright even when the body is dim. He also kept a short record each night of what he felt, what thoughts came, and how he responded. These notes later appeared as the calm passages about illness in the Meditations. The story shows that Marcus used the same habit of journaling and mental rehearsal when faced with personal hardship. Both anecdotes link directly to the 3 modern habits. Marcus' notebook is the ancestor of today's journal. His quiet moments before battle are the ancestor of a morning reflection. His mental walk through possible pain is the ancestor of negative visualization. The ancient practice proves that the exercises have stood the test of time. Even with these stories, some people raise doubts. The first doubt is that the exercises feel forced, like a chore that must be done every day. Some argue that forcing the mind can create more stress, not less. The counterpoint is that the exercises are meant to be brief and gentle. They are not a rigid schedule. The purpose is to give the mind a short pause, not to add another task. If a person feels pressure, they can shorten the time, use a single question, or skip a day. The goal is to keep the habit light, so that it becomes a natural part of the day rather than a heavy load. The second doubt is that the practices may not suit all personalities. Some people are very spontaneous and feel that a structured reflection clashes with their style. Others may think that picturing bad outcomes makes them more anxious. The response is that the exercises can be adapted. A person who likes action can turn the morning reflection into a short walk, speaking the questions aloud while moving. A person who finds negative visualization stressful can limit it to a single simple picture, such as a missed bus, rather than a dramatic loss. The core idea is to train the mind, not to force a one-size-fits-all routine. Different people can find a version that feels right. Modern practitioners have taken these ancient ideas and shaped them for today. One well-known teacher is Massimo Pigliucci, a philosopher who writes about practical stoicism. Pigliucci often suggests a daily Stoic check-in that looks a lot like the morning reflection described here. He also writes about premeditatio malorum, which is the Latin name for negative visualization. In his books, Pigliucci shares stories of athletes and CEOs who use the practice to stay calm before a big game or a product launch. He also recommends a brief evening note, similar to the journal entry in this script. By linking these modern tips to the ancient habits, Pigliucci shows that the exercises can fit any era. The 3 exercises also have clear, real-world benefits. Research in psychology shows that short reflective practices improve focus and reduce anxiety. Imagining possible setbacks helps people feel less shocked when they occur. Writing a brief journal entry improves memory and helps people see patterns in their behavior. When these benefits are combined with the Stoic belief that the mind can shape the response to any event, the result is a steady, resilient outlook. To bring the ideas together, the narrator can remind the listener of the core ideas from earlier sections. Those ideas include the belief that external events are not under personal control, that thoughts are the source of feelings, and that virtue is acting with wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. The morning reflection asks the mind to sort what is controllable. Negative visualization reminds the mind that loss is not the end of the story. The journal entry lets a person see growth in virtue over time. By using the 3 habits, a modern person can practice the same principles that Marcus Aurelius lived by. A final practical tip is to set a small cue for each habit. For the morning reflection, the cue can be the sound of the alarm. For negative visualization, the cue can be a pause before a meeting. For the journal, the cue can be the click of a laptop closing at night. When the cue appears, the mind knows to pause for a few breaths and follow the simple steps. Over weeks, the cues become gentle reminders that guide the mind back to calm. In summary, the 3 exercises, morning reflection, negative visualization, and a brief journal, are easy ways to bring Stoic practice into daily life. They echo the habits of Marcus Aurelius before battles and during illness. They help people handle a job interview or a family dispute with steadier hearts. They can be shaped to fit different personalities, and they have modern supporters like Massimo Pigliucci. By linking each habit to the core Stoic ideas, the practices become more than routines. They become a path to a calmer, more purposeful life. Listeners are invited to try one habit. Marcus Aurelius is often praised for the calm voice that rings through his book Meditations. Yet, even in his own time, some people did not agree with the way he asked people to keep their feelings in check. One of the earliest critics was the Christian writer Tertullian. Tertullian wrote that the Stoic idea of for indifference to pleasure and pain makes a person act as if he has no heart. He said, "For Stoics, indifference is a kind of death for the soul." In a short letter, Tertullian argued that a true Christian must feel love, grief, and joy because those feelings show that a person cares about others. He felt that Marcus' call to stay calm under any storm could turn a person into a stone, unable to help a neighbor who is suffering. Centuries later, a modern philosopher named Martha Nussbaum raised a different kind of worry. In her book, The Therapy of Desire, Nussbaum wrote that Stoic training can close the door to imagination. She said, "When we try to push feeling out of the way, we also push out the stories that help us see what is right." Nussbaum worries that by trying to be completely rational, a person may miss the moral clues that come from feeling. She points to cases where artists need strong emotion to create work that moves other people. If a painter tried to follow Marcus' rule of calm, the painting might lose its power. These two voices, one from the 3rd century and one from the 21st, help to frame a larger conversation about emotional restraint. The first example looks at friendships. Imagine a friend who just lost a job. A Stoic might tell the friend to accept what you cannot change and keep a steady tone. The friend may feel that the Stoic is not really listening, that the calm words are like a blanket that does not fit. The second example looks at creative work. A writer who feels deep sadness might try to turn that feeling into a story. If the writer follows Marcus's advice to keep the mind clear of passion, the story could become flat, lacking the spark that makes readers feel something. In both cases, the question is whether holding back feeling helps or hurts. A historical anecdote from the Roman Senate adds a real-world flavor to the debate. In the year 1706, after a costly war in the north, a senator named Aulus Gellius raised his voice against the emperor's Stoic policy of no complaint. He argued that soldiers who had seen death needed more than a calm mind. They needed a place to mourn. Marcus listened, but he replied that a ruler must not be moved by personal grief, because the state depends on steady hands. The Senate murmured, and the debate faded. But the record shows that even in the marble halls of power, some people felt that too much calm could be cold. A more recent anecdote comes from an academic conference held in 2022 at a university in Boston. Scholars gathered to discuss Stoicism in the modern age. One panelist, a psychologist, presented data that people who read Meditations reported lower stress. Another panelist, a literary critic, pushed back, saying the data ignored the cost of emotional suppression in artistic circles. The discussion grew lively, with some scholars quoting Marcus's line, "If you are distressed by anything external, it is not the thing itself that disturbs you, but your judgment about it." Others cited Nussbaum's warning that judgment without feeling can become a blind rule. The debate showed that the old arguments still have new life. Even with these criticisms, many defenders of Marcus' Meditations point to the practical resilience the book offers. A soldier in the 20th century, fighting in a desert, kept a small copy of Meditations in his pocket. When sandstorms battered his camp, he would read the line, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." The soldier said the words helped him stay focused, not because they erased fear, but because they reminded him that his thoughts could shape his reaction. This story is often used to show that the book can act as a mental tool, a kind of pocket guide for dealing with hardship. Another defense comes from the world of leadership training. Many modern business schools include short passages from Meditations in their curriculum. A CEO once told a class that the phrase, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive," helped her set a tone of gratitude for her team. She argued that the book does not ask people to stop feeling, but to choose which feelings to let guide action. In her view, the practice of checking one's thoughts before reacting can improve decision-making, especially in high-pressure environments. To understand the depth of the criticism, it helps to hear directly from Tertullian. In a surviving treatise he wrote, "The Stoic says that the soul must be like a rock, unmoved by the winds of pleasure or pain. Yet a rock cannot feed the hungry, cannot comfort the grieving." This vivid image shows why early Christians saw Stoic calm as a barrier to compassion. Tertullian also warned that the Stoics' claim to be free from passion is a claim to be free from love. The language is simple, but the point is sharp. A life without feeling can become a life without caring. Martha Nussbaum's words come from a different style, but they carry a similar concern. She wrote, "Though a person who refuses to feel may also refuse to see the injustice that hurts others." Nussbaum uses a modern example of a doctor who must balance clinical detachment with empathy for patients. She asks whether a strictly Stoic doctor would be able to comfort a child who is scared of a needle. Her argument suggests that feeling is not just a personal luxury, but a social tool. The two relatable examples mentioned earlier illustrate how the debate works in everyday life. In a friendship, a person who constantly says, "It is all in your mind, so don't worry," may unintentionally shut down a conversation about real pain. In creative work, a musician who tells herself to stay calm and not get carried away may end up with a melody that feels flat, missing the emotional rise that listeners crave. These scenarios show that the line between healthy restraint and harmful suppression can be thin. The Senate anecdote also reveals a political side to the debate. When Aulus Gellius argued for more emotional expression for soldiers, he was not just speaking for the troops. He was also warning that a ruler who never shows grief might be seen as distant, even tyrannical. Marcus's reply, "A ruler must be a rock for the people," reflects his belief that stability comes from inner calm. The tension between these two views highlights a core question. Does a leader need to appear unshaken, or does showing feeling build trust? The modern conference in Boston added a scholarly dimension. One researcher presented a study where participants who read a passage from Meditations for 10 minutes each day reported lower anxiety scores after a month. Another researcher countered, noting that the same participants also reported feeling numb when asked about personal relationships. The back and forth showed that the book can help with stress, but may also create a sense of emotional distance if taken to an extreme. The debate ended without a clear winner, but it reminded listeners that the old arguments still matter. Defenders of the Meditations often point to the book's influence on famous leaders. The Roman general Julius Caesar, before crossing the Rubicon, is said to have kept a copy of Marcus' notes. Later, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill quoted Marcus in a wartime speech, saying, "The obstacle in the path becomes the way." These historical references suggest that the ideas have helped people face real danger. The practical resilience argument says that the book's core lesson, "Control your thoughts, not the world," offers a way to keep moving when everything else seems to fall apart. Leadership trainers today also use the book as a model for emotional agility. They teach students to pause, notice a feeling, label it, and then decide how to act. This method mirrors Marcus' practice of checking the mind before reacting. In a recent workshop for non-profit managers, a facilitator asked participants to read the line, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." The group discussed how this simple line could shape how they talk to volunteers, donors, and the people they serve. The facilitator argued that the Meditations do not ask people to become robots, but to become aware of the mental habits that shape actions. In the end, the criticisms from Tertullian and Nussbaum raise important questions about the cost of emotional restraint. Tertullian's ancient warning that Stoics' indifference is a kind of death for the soul reminds readers that feeling is tied to caring. Nussbaum's modern caution that judgment without feeling can become a blind rule warns that pure reason may miss moral nuance. Both point to a possible danger, that a life lived only by calm thought could become a life that does not respond to the needs of others. The defenses, however, show that the meditations can be a tool for building strength, not a prison. The story of the desert soldier shows how a simple line can help a person survive a harsh environment. The example of the CEO shows how a leader can use a calm mindset to foster gratitude and focus. The influence of the book on military training, on business schools, and on public speeches suggests that many have found a practical benefit. The debate continues in classrooms, in boardrooms, and in living rooms. When a teenager reads the line, "You have power over your mind," not outside events, they may feel a boost of confidence before a big exam. When a therapist asks a client to notice the thought behind a panic attack, she may be echoing Marcus' method. Yet, when a friend cries after a loss, the same calm phrase may feel like a dismissal. When an artist feels that a storm of feeling fuels a new painting, the Stoic call to stay steady may feel limiting. The balance between these forces is what makes the discussion alive. The ancient Senate debate shows that even in the height of empire, people worried about the cost of too much calm. The modern academic conference shows that scholars still test the limits of Stoic ideas. The stories of soldiers and CEOs show that the meditations can be a source of real strength. The warnings from Tertullian and Nussbaum remind that strength without feeling can become cold. In the final analysis, the Meditations remain a book that asks readers to look at their own thoughts. It does not promise that all feeling should be erased, but that thoughts can be examined before they become actions. Whether this leads to a better life may depend on how each person uses the advice. For some, the calm voice of Marcus Aurelius may be a lighthouse in a storm. For others, the lighthouse may seem too dim, and they may need the warmth of a fire that burns with feeling. The conversation between ancient critics, modern philosophers, everyday examples, and real-world stories will likely keep going as long as people try to find the right mix of mind and heart. The Meditations have slipped into many parts of modern life. The words of a Roman emperor can be heard in songs, seen on screens, and felt in books. When the voice of a film or a lyric in a pop song repeats a line from Marcus Aurelius, a quiet reminder of Stoic thought spreads to a new crowd. One popular example comes from a song that many know from the early 2010s. The chorus says, "When the night is dark, I'll keep my fire bright." That line mirrors a line from the Meditations that reads, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Both speak of holding inner light despite outer gloom. The lyricist did not name Marcus, but the idea is the same. The song invites listeners to stay calm inside, just as the emperor taught his own mind to stay calm. Another modern echo appears in a video game that millions have played. In The Witcher 3, the main hero, Geralt of Rivia, walks into danger with a steady gaze. He faces monsters, political intrigue, and personal loss, yet he rarely lets panic rule his actions. In a key scene, Geralt says, "A calm mind sees the path." That sentiment is close to the Meditations passage. If you are distressed by anything external, it is not the thing itself that troubles you, but your judgment about it. Both Geralt and the Roman ruler rely on the power of judgment, not on the events themselves. The story of how the Meditations resurfaced in the West begins in the Renaissance. In the early 1500s, a scholar named Erasmus of Rotterdam found a copy of the Latin text in a monastery library. He made a fresh translation into Latin that was easier to read. Erasmus shared the new version with friends in Florence and Venice. One of those friends, a young humanist named Pietro Bembo, began to quote Marcus in letters to patrons. Bembo's letters praised the emperor's calm, and the letters travelled across Italy. The text spread quickly among scholars who were hungry for ancient wisdom. This revival helped shape the humanist movement, which prized the moral strength of the individual. A second anecdote shows the influence on the Enlightenment. In the mid-1700s, a French philosopher named Voltaire read a French translation of the Meditations. He admired the idea that a ruler could rule with reason and self-control. Voltaire wrote in a private notebook, "The king who knows his own mind can serve his people well." He later used that idea in a play that mocked a foolish monarch. The play's audience heard a line that sounded like Marcus: "Do not let the noise of the crowd disturb the quiet of your heart." The play helped spread Stoic ideas to a broader public, and those ideas fed into the growing belief that reason should guide government. The spread of Marcus Aurelius into movies, music, and games is not without criticism. One common objection says that pop references dilute the original meaning. Critics argue that a lyric that only hints at a Stoic line may turn a deep practice into a catchy phrase. They point out that a short line in a pop song cannot hold the full weight of a meditation on death and duty. The worry is that listeners will think they have mastered the philosophy when they have only heard a surface echo. A second objection focuses on commercial use. Some say that putting Stoic ideas on a t-shirt or using them in a video game trailer cheapens the philosophy. They claim that profit motives turn a guide for inner peace into a marketing tool. The concern is that the original call to self-discipline becomes a brand slogan. When a company prints "Control your mind" like a Roman emperor on a hoodie, the depth of the teaching may be lost. These objections are worth hearing, but they also connect back to earlier sections on personal practice. The earlier part of the series reminded viewers how to read a passage, pause, and ask what the line means for one's own life. When a viewer hears a lyric that mirrors a Stoic line, they can pause and ask the same question. The same habit can be used when a game character shows calm. The habit of reflection turns a pop reference into a doorway for deeper work. Beyond songs and games, the Meditations have appeared in many books. In a best-selling novel from the 1990s, the main character keeps a small notebook with the line, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." The author notes that the notebook is a copy of Marcus' own diary. The character reads the line each night before sleep. The scene shows how a modern reader can keep a piece of ancient wisdom close, just as the emperor kept his own thoughts. Films have also used the text. In the 2000 movie Gladiator, the hero Maximus whispers a line that sounds like a Stoic thought before a battle. "What we do in life echoes in eternity." The line is not a direct quote, but it captures the idea that one's actions matter more than fame or fear. The film's audience hears a version of the Stoic view that duty and inner strength are what define a life. Another clear example appears in a recent television series that follows a detective solving crimes in a noisy city. In one episode, the detective reads a short passage from the Meditations on a sticky note. "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive." The detective uses the line to stay calm while interrogating a suspect. The scene shows how a simple ancient phrase can help a modern mind stay steady in a stressful job. The influence even reaches advertising. A well-known sports brand released a commercial that showed athletes training in harsh weather. The voiceover says, "The obstacle in the way becomes the way forward." That phrase is a modern rendering of the Meditations line. "The impediment to action advances us." The ad tries to link the brand to the idea of turning difficulty into growth. While some see this as a clever tie-in, others see it as a cheap use of a deep idea. A A second commercial use appears in a video game trailer for a popular battle royale title. The trailer shows a lone player standing on a hill as the storm approaches. The text on screen reads, "Control your mind, rule your fate." The line echoes the Meditations' thought that the mind can rule over external chaos. The trailer hopes to sell excitement, but it also spreads the core Stoic message to millions of gamers. These modern appearances show how the Meditations have become part of a cultural language. The text's short, powerful sentences fit well into captions, quotes, and memes. When a meme shows a picture of a cat with the caption, "When the world is noisy, stay still inside," it is echoing the Stoic advice to keep inner peace. The meme format makes the idea travel fast, reaching people who might never pick up a philosophy book. The spread also raises a question about authenticity. When a lyric or a game character uses a Stoic line, does it stay true to the original? Some say that the original text was meant for personal reflection, not for entertainment. Others argue that any new use helps keep the ideas alive. The tension between preservation and adaptation is a theme that repeats throughout history. The Renaissance revival showed that new translations can open old ideas to fresh eyes. The Enlightenment showed that those ideas can shape political thought. Today, pop culture shows that the ideas can shape personal habits. The path from a marble bust in a Roman palace to a smartphone screen is long, but the core message stays the same. The mind can be trained, the self can be steady, and the world can be faced with calm. Returning to the earlier discussion of personal practice, the viewer can take each modern reference as a prompt. When a song lyric sounds like a Stoic line, the listener can pause, repeat the original Meditations passage, and ask how it fits their day. When a game character shows calm, the player can notice the moment, then try a breathing exercise used by the emperor. These small steps turn a pop moment into a chance for growth. The Meditations also appear in academic works that examine modern life. A recent study of college students measured how often they quoted Marcus in social media posts. The study found that students who posted Stoic quotes also reported lower stress levels. The researchers suggested that the act of sharing a Stoic line may reinforce the habit of self-control. The study shows that even a brief reference can have a measurable effect on well-being. A second study looked at how athletes use Stoic ideas before competition. The athletes wrote down a favorite line from the Meditations and read it before a race. Many reported that the Marcus Aurelius sat on a marble throne in a cold stone hall, yet his thoughts often drifted to a quiet garden in his mind. In the pages of his Meditations, he wrote that a man must keep his mind calm, even when the world around him roars. That calm is the heart of Stoic thought. It is a calm that can be compared with the ideas of Plato, Aristotle, and the teachings that later grew in the lands of the Buddha. By looking at these thinkers side by side, a listener can see where they agree, where they differ, and how each idea still lives in daily life. Plato began his work in ancient Athens, a city that loved debate. In the dialogues, Plato used the voice of Socrates to ask questions about truth, justice, and the good. He believed that the world we see is only a shadow of a higher world of forms, perfect ideas that never change. A famous line from the Republic reads, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Though that line comes from Socrates, Plato often repeated it to stress that a life without reflection is empty. Marcus, on the other hand, did not talk about perfect forms. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." For Marcus, the goal was not to reach a world of perfect ideas, but to master the thoughts that come from within. Both men asked people to look inward, but Plato asked for a search for eternal truths, while Marcus asked for a steady mind in a changing world. Aristotle, a student of Plato, took a different path. He believed that knowledge comes from observing the world. In the Nicomachean Ethics he wrote, "Happiness depends upon ourselves." Aristotle thought that the good life is found by practicing virtues in everyday actions. He also said that each thing has a purpose, and a human's purpose is to use reason. Marcus shared the love of reason, but he placed reason inside the mind as a tool to keep emotions in check. Aristotle saw virtue as a middle point between excess and deficiency, a balance that one finds by habit. Marcus saw virtue as a way to stay aligned with nature, a natural order that does not change. The two thinkers both valued reason, yet Aristotle focused on the middle path of habit, while Marcus focused on the inner ruler of the mind. Buddhist thought, which grew in the hills of India and later spread across Asia, also teaches a calm mind. The Buddha said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." This line mirrors Marcus' claim that the mind shapes experience. Both Stoics and Buddhists warn against clinging to desire and anger. Yet Buddhist practice often includes meditation that aims to see the emptiness of all things, while Stoic practice involves daily reflection on one's actions and thoughts. In a modern classroom, a teacher might ask students to argue about the best way to handle a conflict. The debate can feel like a storm of opinions, each student trying to prove a point. In a meditation retreat, participants sit quietly, watching thoughts rise and fall like clouds. The two scenes illustrate the difference between a public debate and an inner quiet. Marcus would advise the debaters to keep their judgments calm, while a Buddhist teacher would ask the retreatants to watch thoughts without judgment. Both paths aim at a steady mind, but the tools differ. The transmission of Greek ideas to Rome provides a vivid historical anecdote. When the Roman general Scipio Africanus returned from the Punic Wars, he brought with him a copy of the works of the Greek philosopher Epicurus. The copy was given to the Roman statesman Cicero, who loved Greek philosophy and translated many of its works into Latin. Cicero's translations made the ideas of Plato and Aristotle available to Roman readers. Later, a young Marcus Aurelius, who loved reading, would study these translations. He found in them a guide for his own rule. In this way, a Greek text travelled across the sea, was turned into a Roman language, and then helped shape an emperor's thoughts. A second anecdote reaches farther east. In the 8th century, a group of Arab scholars gathered in Baghdad to translate Greek works into Arabic. They took Aristotle's writings on logic and ethics, and they also examined the Stoic fragments that survived. These Arabic versions later traveled along the Silk Road to China, where scholars compared them with Confucian and Buddhist ideas. The Chinese philosopher Zhu Xi, for example, read the translated works and found common ground with Confucian teachings about self-cultivation. This exchange shows how the Stoic focus on inner discipline could meet the Confucian focus on proper conduct. It also shows that the meeting of ideas was not a one-way street. Each culture took what fit its own view. When the ideas of Stoicism meet those of Confucius, a new link appears. Confucius taught, "It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop." This line echoes the Stoic belief that steady effort over time builds character. Both traditions value patience and steady work. Yet they differ in focus. Confucius placed great importance on social roles and rituals, while Stoicism stresses the individual's inner peace regardless of external status. The meeting of these thoughts in later East-West dialogues shows that similar values can arise in different cultures, even if the reasons behind them differ. Modern readers often ask whether Stoicism is too rigid. One counterargument says that the Stoic rule, be indifferent to external things, can feel like a cold dismissal of feelings. Critics point to the modern therapist who says that feeling pain is part of healing, and that telling a patient to simply ignore the pain may cause more harm. From this view, Stoicism may seem to demand a strict self-control that leaves little room for human vulnerability. Another counterargument says that the similarities between Stoicism, Plato, Aristotle, and Buddhist thought are only skin deep. The claim is that because each tradition mentions virtue or calm mind, they are essentially the same. Yet deeper study shows that each uses different methods, goals, and metaphysical bases. Plato's world of forms, Aristotle's focus on habit, the Buddha's insight into emptiness, and Marcus's practice of daily self-examination all point to distinct paths, even if they share some language. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in many places. A modern manager might read Marcus's line, "The impediment to action advances us," and use it to turn a setback into a chance to improve a process. An athlete might recall the Buddhist advice to watch thoughts without judgment, using it to stay calm under pressure. A teacher might use Plato's method of asking questions to help students discover their own answers, while also reminding them of Marcus's advice to keep the mind steady when the class becomes noisy. In each case, the ancient words become tools for everyday problems. Modern interpretations of Stoic thought often blend it with other traditions. Some writers combine Marcus' reflections with mindfulness practices from Buddhism, creating a hybrid that encourages both rational analysis and present-moment awareness. Others compare Marcus's idea of living according to nature with Aristotle's notion of fulfilling one's purpose, suggesting that the two can support each other in a modern ethical framework. In popular podcasts, hosts will quote Marcus, then ask a guest to explain how the idea fits with a Buddhist meditation technique. These conversations show that the ancient ideas are still alive, being reshaped for new audiences. To bring the comparison into a concrete scene, imagine a high school classroom where students argue whether a rule should be changed. The debate grows heated, voices rise, and each side tries to win. A teacher who remembers Marcus might pause the class and ask, "What can each of you control in this moment?" The students then notice their own breathing, their own tone, and the discussion settles into a calmer exchange. In a meditation retreat, participants sit in a circle, eyes closed, listening to a guide who says, "Notice each thought, then let it go." A participant who has just finished a stressful week may feel the same calm that Marcus described, even though the setting is very different. Both examples show how the same principle, keeping the mind steady, can be used in a debate or in quiet sitting. Another everyday illustration comes from a driver stuck in traffic. The driver feels frustration rise as the cars crawl forward. Remembering Marcus's line, "If you are distressed by external things, it is not they that trouble you but your judgment of them," the driver can choose to view the jam as an opportunity to listen to a favorite podcast. The same driver might also recall a Buddhist teaching that urges one to observe the feeling of irritation without clinging to it. By combining the two, the driver finds a way to stay calm while the world moves slowly. The story of how Greek ideas reached Rome also includes a personal twist. The philosopher Musonius Rufus, a teacher of Stoic thought, once visited the palace of a young emperor. The emperor, later known as Marcus, asked Musonius how a ruler could stay calm while dealing with wars and politics. Musonius answered, "A ruler must see each event as a wave that comes and goes, not as a stone that stays." This advice stayed with Marcus, who later wrote in his journal that a ruler must not be tossed by the sea of events. The anecdote shows how a simple conversation can plant a seed that grows into a lifelong practice. The later East-West exchange also includes a story of a Chinese monk named Xuanzang, who traveled to India in the 7th century to bring Buddhist texts back to China. On his journey, he met Persian scholars who were translating Greek works into Arabic. He heard them discuss the idea that the wise man is content with what he has. Xuanzang took this thought back to his own Buddhist teachers noting the similarity to the Buddhist teaching that desire is the root of suffering. Though the monk never met a Stoic, the shared idea traveled across cultures, showing how different traditions can meet on common ground. When looking at the core of each philosophy, some key differences become clear. Plato's idea of the forms suggests that there is a perfect version of everything that exists beyond the physical world. Marcus never spoke of a perfect world. He focused on the present moment and how the mind can shape that moment. Aristotle's view that virtue is a habit formed by repeated action differs from Marcus' view that virtue is a state of mind aligned with nature. The Buddha's teaching that all things are empty of a permanent self also differs from Stoic belief that the self, while part of nature, can be guided by reason. These differences matter because they shape how each thinker advises a person to live. Yet, the overlap cannot be ignored. All four traditions warn against letting passions rule the mind. All four suggest that a life of reflection leads to a better life. All four offer a method for daily practice. Plato's dialogues. The story of Marcus Aurelius and his book called Meditations has become a quiet guide for many who lead people today. In the first part of this video, the audience heard how a Roman emperor used a notebook to check his thoughts each night. The practical exercises that were suggested there still help readers pause and ask themselves simple questions. Those exercises also appear in the modern workplace, where a leader can stop for a moment and ask, "What can I control right now?" The ideas from the ancient text have traveled far, and they now sit on the shelves of CEOs, military commanders, teachers, and even sports coaches. One modern leader who often mentions Marcus Aurelius is a former general turned CEO of a large technology firm. He told a business magazine that the line, "If it is not right, do not do it," helped him decide whether to launch a product that was still buggy. He said the short reminder kept him honest when investors pressed for speed. Another well-known commander, a Navy admiral, has quoted the emperor during a briefing. "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." The admiral used the phrase to remind his crew that morale comes from the way they think about danger, not from the danger itself. These stories are not isolated. A quick look at recent interviews shows that many leaders cite Marcus Aurelius when they talk about staying calm under pressure. The book is short, but each page is packed with short sayings that can be read in a few minutes. That makes it easy for a busy manager to pick a line and share it at a meeting. The manager can say, "Remember what Marcus wrote. The obstacle on the path becomes the way." The manager can then turn a supply shortage into a chance to test a new process. The quote gives a simple frame that helps the team see a problem as a chance, not as a dead end. A manager handling a crisis can use the same idea. Imagine a retail store that suddenly loses a key supplier. The manager can feel panic rise. He can stop, breathe, and recall the emperor's words, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years." The line reminds the manager that life is short, and that panic does not help. The manager can then ask the team, "What can we do right now with what we have?" The answer might be to source a local product or to offer a discount on a different line. The manager's calm response spreads to the staff, and the store recovers faster than if fear had taken over. A teacher guiding a classroom can also find a place for the meditations. A teacher might face a noisy class that refuses to settle for a test. The teacher can think of the emperor's note. "When you arise in the morning, think of the precious privilege of being alive." The teacher can use that thought to remind students that learning is a gift, not a burden. By sharing a short version of the quote, the teacher can shift the mood from resistance to curiosity. The students then see the lesson as a chance to grow rather than a chore. The reach of the meditations goes back further than the modern boardroom. One famous anecdote tells how Napoleon Bonaparte, after his defeat at Waterloo, asked a soldier to bring him a copy of Marcus Aurelius. Napoleon read the line, "The universe is change," Our life is what our thoughts make it, and he kept the book in his pocket for the rest of his exile. He told a friend that the emperor's calm mind helped him accept his loss. The story shows how a leader in the 19th century found strength in the same short sayings that today's CEOs quote on LinkedIn. Another historical note comes from the United States Navy. In the early 1900s, a naval training program added a short reading from the Meditations to its daily routine. Midshipmen would spend 5 minutes each night reading a passage and then writing a short note about how it applied to their duties. The program's director wrote in a report, "The simple wisdom of the Roman emperor teaches our sailors to keep a clear mind when the sea turns rough." The practice stayed in some naval schools for decades, and it still appears in a few modern leadership courses that borrow from the old Navy tradition. The influence of the Meditations on leadership is not without critics. One common objection is that people often pick only the nice lines and ignore the harsher parts. A scholar of ancient philosophy warned that cherry-picking quotes can turn a deep work into a set of feel-good slogans. The scholar pointed out that the emperor also wrote about duty to the empire, about accepting suffering, and about the limits of personal desire. If a leader only uses the gentle parts, the deeper challenge of the text may be lost. The warning invites readers to look at the whole notebook, not just the parts that fit a modern agenda. A second counter-argument says that ancient ethics may not fit modern corporate culture. Some ethicists argue that the Roman idea of living according to nature assumes a world where the individual's role is tied to a city-state, not to a global market. They claim that the emperor's focus on self-control and humility can clash with a business culture that rewards bold risk-taking and personal branding. One critic wrote, "Applying a 2,000 moral code to a startup can create tension with investors who expect rapid growth." The critic suggests that leaders need to adapt the ideas, not copy them unchanged. These objections do not erase the value of the Meditations, but they do remind readers to use the text wisely. The earlier section on practical exercises suggested that readers write down a short quote each day and then note how they acted on it. That habit can help avoid cherry-picking, because the writer sees the whole range of thoughts over time. The earlier critique section also warned that the text can feel vague if readers do not ask follow-up questions. By pairing each quote with a concrete action, a leader can test whether the ancient idea really fits the modern problem. Modern interpretations of the Meditations often blend the old with new science. A leadership coach recently compared Marcus's advice to the modern concept of bull-growth mindset. The coach said, "When Marcus writes that the obstacle becomes the way, he is describing the same idea that psychologists call turning a challenge into a learning chance." The coach then gave an example of a software team that faced a major bug. The team leader quoted the emperor, asked the team to list what they could learn, and turned the bug into a training session. The result was a stronger code base and a more confident team. Another modern take comes from the field of ethics. A professor of business ethics taught a class that used the Meditations to explore integrity under pressure. The professor asked students to read the line, "Never let your mind be ruled by the opinions of others." The class then discussed a case where a company could hide a safety flaw to save money. The professor guided the students to see that the ancient advice pushes them to act on principle, not on what shareholders might think. The discussion showed that the old text can still spark debate about right and wrong in a corporate setting. Analogies help make these ideas clear. Think of a ship's compass. The compass does not steer the ship, but it shows the direction. Marcus Aurelius' short sayings act like that compass for a leader's mind. When a storm of crisis hits, the compass points to a steady thought. Focus on what you can control. The leader then adjusts the sails, not by ignoring the storm, but by aligning the ship's course with the calm direction. The analogy shows how a simple line can guide a complex situation. A second analogy compares the meditations to a garden. A gardener plants many seeds, waters them, and watches them grow. Some seeds become flowers, some become weeds. If a gardener only picks the flowers, the garden loses balance. Likewise, a leader who only selects the pleasant quotes may miss the parts that teach patience with hardship. By tending to the whole garden, the leader learns to accept both bloom and thorns, and that creates a more resilient mindset. The influence of the meditations on leadership also appears in popular culture. In a recent interview, a famous movie director said he kept a copy of the book on his desk. He explained that before filming a big scene, he would read the line, "Do not waste time arguing about what a good man should be." The director used the line to keep the crew focused on the task at hand, rather than on endless debates about artistic vision. The anecdote shows that the ancient advice can help in creative fields as well as in business or the military. The legacy of the meditations also lives in small daily habits. A manager at a logistics firm told his team that each morning he reads a short passage and then writes one sentence about how it will shape his day. He said this habit keeps him from reacting impulsively when a shipment is delayed. He also shared that his team now does the same, and they have seen fewer angry emails and more calm problem solving. The simple practice mirrors the earlier suggestion that readers keep a journal of their thoughts, a habit that the emperor himself used. Another real-world example comes from a high school teacher who uses the meditations in a life skills class. The teacher asks students to pick a quote each week and then act on it in a small way. One student chose the line, "When you have the power to help, do so." The student then helped a classmate with a math problem. The teacher reported that the class began to notice more small acts of kindness, and the overall atmosphere improved. The teacher's story shows how the ancient text can shape behavior even in a teenage setting. The book's influence on leadership is also visible in the world of sports. A veteran basketball coach told a sports magazine that he reads a passage before each game. The soul becomes tinted with the color of its thoughts. He uses the line to remind his players that confidence comes from a calm mind, not from loud hype. The coach said the team's performance improved when they focused on steady thoughts rather than on the pressure of the crowd. The coach's use of the quote is another modern example of how the ancient wisdom can be a tool for focus. Even in the tech world, a startup founder cited Marcus Aurelius when raising a round of funding. The founder wrote in an email, "Why read the line, 'Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of the world'? It helped me stay calm when investors asked tough questions." The founder said the calm mindset helped him answer clearly, and the investors appreciated the composure. The story shows that a short ancient line can still be a source of confidence in high-stakes modern settings. The text's influence is not limited to individual leaders. Whole organizations have built programs around its ideas. A large non-profit created a Stoic leadership retreat where participants read passages from the meditations each morning and then discuss how the ideas apply to their mission. The retreat's facilitator quoted the emperor's line, "Do not be angry at the things you cannot change." Participants reported feeling less stressed and more focused on what they could do for the community. The retreat demonstrates how a group can use the ancient work as a shared framework. The meditations also appear in military training beyond the Navy anecdote. A modern Army academy includes a short reading from the book in its leadership course. Cadets are asked to write about how they can stay steady when a mission goes wrong. One cadet wrote, "I will remember that the obstacle is the way, and I will use the problem to learn." The instructor noted that the cadet's note showed a shift from blame to action. The inclusion of the text in a modern academy shows its lasting relevance for those who must lead under fire. When the influence of the meditations is traced, a pattern emerges. Leaders from many fields find a short line that fits a moment of doubt, and they use it to steady their thoughts. The pattern is similar to the earlier practical exercise of picking a quote each day. The difference now is that the quote is shared with a group, not just kept private. This sharing can create a common language for calm action. The earlier critique of the meditations warned that the text can feel vague if readers do not ask follow-up questions.